Tonight, we're drifting back to Tudor England to talk about Henry VIII, and what a beautifully chaotic mess this man's life turned out to be. This is the king who went through 6 wives like a subscription service he kept cancelling. How does one man's desperate need for sons and validation end up reshaping an entire nation? It is June 28th, 1491, and at Greenwich Palace on the River Thames, a second son is born. His name is Henry Tudor. And honestly, nobody really cares. His father is Henry VII, who became king the old-fashioned way, by killing the last guy who had the job. Real fairy tale stuff. His mother is Elizabeth of York, a princess from the losing side of the war. The winners decided that the best way to end decades of bloody civil war was to have her marry Henry VII. You know, because making 2 enemies get married has always been a foolproof peace plan. Spoiler, forcing people to become in-laws doesn't actually make them stop hating each other. But hey, at least there was cake. But here's the thing. They already have an heir. A perfect golden boy named Arthur, born 5 years earlier and already being groomed to rule the world. So this second son, this baby Henry, he's basically a human spare tire. Insurance, a backup plan in case something goes wrong. No one throws parades, no one writes songs about his glorious destiny. He's just there. The kid who exists in case his older brother trips down the stairs. And for the first 10 years of his life, that's exactly what he is. The spare. Henry grows up at Eltham Palace, a gorgeous manor southeast of London. He lives with his sisters, Margaret and Mary, in a world of music lessons and Latin homework, far from the dangerous politics of his father's court. And the kid is brilliant. Genuinely brilliant. He learns Latin, French, and Spanish. He studies theology like he's training to be a priest. He plays the lute and the virginals. He learns to fence and joust and ride like his life depends on it. One observer gushes that young Henry speaks good French, Latin, and Spanish, is very religious, extremely fond of hunting, and fond of tennis. Basically, a Renaissance dreamboat with a god complex. He's tall, too. Like, really tall. By adulthood, he'll tower at over 6 feet, which in the 1500s makes him look like an actual giant. Red gold hair, fair skin, athletic build. The whole package. But none of it matters. Because he's not meant to be king. That job belongs to Arthur. Arthur the firstborn. Arthur the Prince of Wales. Arthur, who at 15 marries a Spanish princess named Catherine of Aragon in a lavish ceremony that secures England's alliance with Spain. Everything is going according to plan. And then, in April 1502, Arthur dies. Just dies. Probably the sweating sickness, this terrifying plague that kills healthy young people in hours. One day Arthur is planning his future as king. The next day he's dead. 10-year-old Henry goes to bed as the spare. He wakes up as the heir to the throne of England. Overnight, everything changes. His entire household gets reorganized. Serious tutors arrive to teach him how to actually rule a kingdom. His father, King Henry VII, who fought a war to win this crown, becomes absolutely obsessed with keeping his last son alive. No more risky jousting, no dangerous hunts, no unnecessary adventures. One Spanish ambassador literally complains that young Henry is kept like a girl, so protected and sheltered that barely anyone can talk to him. It gets worse. In February 1503, his mother dies in childbirth. Elizabeth of York, the woman who sang him lullabies and held him when he cried, gone at 37. Contemporary accounts say Henry weeps uncontrollably. Now he's truly alone. No brother, no mother, just his paranoid father and the crushing weight of a destiny he never asked for. But here's the twist. Henry doesn't collapse under the pressure. He doesn't fade into the background. Instead, he absolutely thrives. By his teenage years, He's this towering, athletic, insanely talented young man who seems good at literally everything. Languages? Fluent in 3. Music? Composes his own songs. Theology? Can debate priests twice his age. Sports? Dominates at hunting, jousting, tennis, wrestling. People call him a golden prince. They say he has universal genius. He's basically the Tudor version of that annoying kid who's captain of the football team and gets straight A's and plays violin at the school concert. Except this kid is about to rule an entire country. And there's something else growing inside him. A hunger, a bone-deep certainty that he's special, chosen, destined for greatness. When everyone treats you like you're God's gift to England from the age of 10, you start to believe it. You start to believe the rules don't apply to you. On April 21st, 1509, Henry VII dies. The old king leaves behind a stable kingdom, a full treasury, and a 17-year-old son who's been waiting his entire life for this moment. Henry Tudor becomes Henry VIII, King of England. The spare becomes the sovereign. The backup plan becomes the main event. The kid nobody expected to rule now holds absolute power over millions of people. And here's where things get interesting. Because this golden boy, this perfect Renaissance prince, this king who seems blessed by heaven, he's about to do things that will shock Europe. He'll defy the Pope. He'll create a new church. He'll behead 2 wives and divorce 2 more. He'll execute friends, ministers, and anyone who stands in his way. He'll transform from a beloved young king into one of history's most notorious tyrants. But right now, in the spring of 1509, none of that has happened yet. Right now, Henry VIII is 17 years old, impossibly handsome, and sitting on the throne of England with the whole world at his feet. What could possibly go wrong? Chapter 2. The Golden King and the Spanish Queen. The year is 1509, and Henry VIII has a problem. Actually, that's not quite right. Henry VIII has the opposite of a problem. He's 17 years old, ridiculously handsome, insanely rich, and he's just become King of England. Life is basically perfect, except for one tiny detail. He needs to get married. Now, his father had arranged for him to marry Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess who'd been married to his dead brother Arthur. Bit awkward, that. Your brother's widow? In 1509, marrying your brother's widow requires special permission from the Pope because it's technically against church law. But Henry VII had secured that papal dispensation years ago because Catherine came with an excellent dowry and a crucial alliance with Spain. Very practical. Very Tudor. So on June 11th, 1509, just weeks after becoming king, 17-year-old Henry marries 23-year-old Catherine of Aragon in a private ceremony. And here's the thing. He actually seems to like her. Catherine is intelligent, educated, deeply religious, and dignified. She's also been through hell. She spent years in England as a widow, practically penniless, caught in political limbo while Henry VII decided whether to marry her to young Henry or send her home. She's resilient. She's survived. On June 24th, 1509, Midsummer's Day, Henry and Catherine are crowned together at Westminster Abbey. The ceremony is absolutely spectacular. Gold everywhere, tapestries hanging from every wall, the streets of London packed with cheering crowds, music echoing off ancient stone. This isn't just a coronation, it's a statement. The Tudors have arrived, and they're here to dazzle. Contemporary accounts gush about the young king. One observer writes that the court resplended with gold and silver as Henry initiates a constant round of parties, jousts, and masks. The new king loves throwing feasts that would make Vegas blush. He loves tournaments where he can show off his athletic skills. He loves being the center of attention. And why wouldn't he? He's young, talented, and everyone adores him. The early years of Henry's reign are genuinely golden. He's not like his father, that grim, calculating man who hoarded money and trusted no one. Henry VIII is generous, charismatic, fun. He surrounds himself with brilliant minds. Erasmus, the famous Dutch scholar, praises Henry's intelligence. Thomas More, the humanist lawyer who'll later write Utopia, becomes a trusted friend and advisor. Artists like Hans Holbein eventually flock to his court. This is the English Renaissance in full bloom. But Henry? Henry doesn't actually enjoy the boring parts of being king. Sitting in council meetings? Tedious. Reviewing financial reports? Dull. Making complicated policy decisions? Hard work. So Henry does what any clever 17-year-old would do. He delegates it all. Enter Thomas Wolsey. Wolsey is a brilliant, ambitious churchman who rises faster than anyone expected. By 1515, Henry makes him Lord Chancellor, basically the Prime Minister of England. Wolsey is a political genius. He handles the day-to-day governance while Henry goes hunting and jousting and having a magnificent time. It's the perfect arrangement. Wolsey gets power, Henry gets to play, and for a while, it works beautifully. In 1513, Henry decides he wants military glory, because what's the point of being a king if you can't invade France like your ancestors did? So he joins the Pope's anti-French alliance and personally leads an army across the Channel. The campaign isn't exactly Agincourt, that legendary battle where England destroyed France against impossible odds. Instead, Henry wins a tiny fight called the Battle of the Spurs, which got its name because the French soldiers ran away so fast they wore out their spurs. He also captures a few small towns that nobody's heard of. It's basically the military equivalent of winning a participation trophy. But Henry gets to dress up in shiny armor and pretend he's a badass warrior king. So in his mind, he's basically conquered all of Europe. Mission accomplished. Meanwhile, back in England, something extraordinary happens. Scotland decides this is the perfect time to invade northern England. Big mistake. Catherine of Aragon is running the country while Henry's off playing soldier, and she is not having it. She rallies the English forces like a boss. On September 9th, 1513, at Flodden Field, the English don't just beat the Scottish army, they absolutely obliterate them. We're talking one of the worst military disasters in Scottish history. King James IV of Scotland, who, by the way, is Henry's brother-in-law, dies on the battlefield. And here's where it gets wild. Catherine finds James's blood-soaked coat and mails it to Henry in France like a deranged souvenir. "Hey, honey, look what I got you." It's the Tudor equivalent of sending a selfie with your defeated enemy. Henry's over in France winning his participation trophy battle, and his wife just sent him proof she won an actual war. You can practically hear her saying, "So, how's your little trip going?" Henry returns home to discover his wife has won a more impressive victory than he has. Does this bother him? Hard to say. But it shows that Catherine is no wilting flower. She's capable, intelligent, and fierce when she needs to be. The years roll on. Henry keeps trying to make England matter on the European stage. It's tricky. England isn't as big or wealthy as France or Spain, but Henry's related to everyone through marriage. Catherine's father is King Ferdinand of Spain. Catherine's nephew is Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor who rules basically half of Europe. Henry uses these connections to punch above his weight. In June 1520, Henry stages one of the most extravagant diplomatic summits in history. It's called the Field of the Cloth of Gold, and the name isn't an exaggeration. Henry meets King Francis I of France outside Calais for nearly 2 weeks of competitive magnificence. Both kings are young, vain, and desperate to outshine each other. They erect temporary palaces covered in gold cloth. They hold jousts and feasts and wrestling matches. Fountains literally flow with wine. At one point, Henry challenges Francis to a wrestling match because apparently these two kings are basically frat boys with crowns. Francis wins. Henry is so pissed he nearly starts an actual war over it. Imagine spending millions of dollars on a peace summit and almost ruining everything because you lost at wrestling. Well, that's Henry VIII for you. The whole event costs an absolutely obscene fortune. We're talking bankrupt to small country levels of money, and it achieves exactly 0 political goals. Nothing gets signed, no alliances are made, no problems are solved. But it looks amazing in the history books, and for Henry, that's all that matters. He'd rather be broke and legendary than rich and boring. In 1521, Henry does something that will seem deeply ironic later. He publishes a book called Defense of the Seven Sacraments, attacking the Protestant reformer Martin Luther and defending traditional Catholic doctrine. Pope Leo X is so impressed that he grants Henry the title Defender of the Faith. Henry wears this honor proudly. He sees himself as a champion of the true church, a pious king blessed by God. Spoiler alert, this will age poorly, but beneath all the pageantry and glory and theological posturing, there's a problem growing. A quiet, desperate problem that will eventually tear everything apart. Catherine keeps getting pregnant, and the babies keep dying. In 1511, she gives birth to a son, Henry, Duke of Cornwall. He dies after 52 days. Then come the miscarriages, the stillbirths. Another son in 1513 who dies within weeks. More pregnancies that end in heartbreak. Finally, in 1516, Catherine gives birth to a healthy baby who survives. Princess Mare, a daughter. Henry celebrates publicly. But privately, he's worried. England has never been successfully ruled by a queen. The one time it was tried, centuries ago, it led to civil war. Henry needs a son. The whole point of the Tudor dynasty is stability, and stability means a male heir. As the 1520s wear on, it becomes clear that Catherine, now in her 40s, probably won't have more children. Her last pregnancy ends in 1518. After that, nothing. Henry has one surviving child, a daughter. Not what he needs, not what the kingdom expects. And slowly, quietly, a terrible thought begins to form in Henry's mind. What if God is punishing him? What if marrying his brother's widow was a sin, and the lack of sons is divine judgment? There's even a verse in the Bible, Leviticus 20:21, that says a man who marries his brother's wife shall be childless. Well, not quite childless, but close enough. The Golden King, the defender of the faith, the man who threw feasts and won battles and dazzled Europe, starts to wonder if he's been living in sin for nearly 20 years. And once that thought takes root, everything changes. Because Henry VIII doesn't just want a son, he needs one. He's convinced his entire dynasty depends on it. And when a man with absolute power becomes convinced that God wants him to do something, there's no force on earth that can stop him. Not the Pope, not the Church, not even the wife who stood by him through everything. The golden years are ending. The music is fading. And beneath the surface of this glittering court, something dark and dangerous is beginning to stir. Chapter 3. The Great Matter. The year is 1527, and Henry VIII has a new problem. Actually, he has two problems, and they're about to collide in the most spectacular way possible. Problem 1. Henry is 36 years old, and after 18 years of marriage to Catherine of Aragon, he has one surviving child, a daughter, Princess Mare. In a world where queens don't rule and succession crises trigger civil wars, this is a disaster waiting to happen. And problem 2? Henry has fallen completely, obsessively, desperately in love with a woman who refuses to sleep with him. Her name is Anne Boleyn. Anne isn't classically beautiful. She's not blonde and curvy like the Tudor ideal. She's dark-haired, sharp-featured, witty, and absolutely magnetic. She's been educated in France, where she learned how to dress, dance, and flirt like the French court ladies who could make kings beg for more. And she's a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine. Awkward. Henry has had mistresses before. It's expected. Kings take lovers. Nobody really cares as long as you're discreet. But Anne Boleyn isn't playing that game. When Henry makes his move, Anne refuses. She won't be his mistress. She won't be another Mary Boleyn, her own sister, who'd already warmed the king's bed and been discarded. If Henry wants Anne, he'll have to marry her. And Henry, to the shock of everyone who knows him, agrees. But there's a slight problem. He's already married. So Henry does what any logical person would do. He decides to get a divorce. Except in 1527, there's no such thing as divorce. Not really. What you can get is an annulment, a declaration that your marriage was never valid in the first place. And Henry has the perfect argument. That verse in Leviticus 20:21, "If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. They shall be childless." Catherine was married to his brother Arthur. Therefore, his marriage to Catherine must be cursed by God. Hence the lack of sons. It's convenient theology, very convenient. Henry calls his quest for an annulment the great matter. He genuinely seems to believe God wants this, or maybe he's just convinced himself. When you're king and you want something badly enough, divine will and personal desire start to look remarkably similar. In 1527, Henry sends his most powerful minister, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, to sort it out with Rome. Now, Wolsey is a political genius. For over a decade, he's basically run England while Henry went hunting. He's Lord Chancellor, papal legate, the second most powerful man in the kingdom. If anyone can get the Pope to grant an annulment, it's Wolsey. There's just one tiny problem. Pope Clement VII is effectively a prisoner of Emperor Charles V. And Charles V? That's Catherine of Aragon's nephew, the most powerful man in Europe, the guy who literally controls half the known world. Charles is not going to let his aunt be humiliated, and the Pope, who watched Charles's army sack Rome in 1527, is not going to risk angering him. So when Henry's request lands on the Pope's desk, Clement does what any sensible person would do when caught between a rock and a hard place. He stalls, he delays, he deliberates. He sends legates to England to hold hearings. He promises to consider the matter carefully. He does everything except actually grant the annulment. And Henry is losing his mind. In 1529, Wolsey manages to convene a special church court in England with papal authority, hoping to settle the matter there. It's a disaster. Catherine of Aragon appears before the court and delivers an absolutely devastating speech. She swears that her marriage to Arthur was never consummated. She was a virgin when she married Henry. Their marriage is legitimate. She is his true wife, and she will not quietly disappear so he can marry some younger woman. The court adjourns without reaching a verdict. The case gets recalled to Rome, where it will drag on indefinitely. Wolsey has failed. For Henry, this is unforgivable. Wolsey was supposed to fix this. Wolsey always fixed things. That was the entire arrangement. Henry plays, Wolsey works. But now Wolsey has failed at the one thing that matters most. In the autumn of 1529, Henry strips Wolsey of his offices. The Lord Chancellor's seal is taken. His palaces are confiscated, including the magnificent Hampton Court, which Wolsey had foolishly made too grand. Henry moves in immediately. Wolsey, who'd been one of the most powerful ministers in British history, is suddenly nothing. In November 1530, Wolsey is arrested on charges of treason. He's ordered to London to face trial. He knows what that means. Trial, conviction, execution. The king he served for 15 years is going to kill him. Wolsey never makes it to London. He dies on the journey, broken in spirit and body. But before he dies, he reportedly says something that will echo through history. "Had I but served God as diligently as I have served the king, he would not have given me over in my grey hairs." It's a warning, a prophecy, a recognition that Henry's favour is a dangerous thing. But Henry isn't listening. He's moved on, because two new men are rising to take Wolsey's place. The first is Thomas Cromwell, a common-born lawyer with a brilliant, ruthless mind. Cromwell had been Wolsey's servant. Now he becomes Henry's. And Cromwell has an idea. What if Henry doesn't need the Pope's permission? What if English law is enough? What if Parliament can declare the marriage invalid? What if the King of England doesn't actually answer to Rome at all? It's a revolutionary thought. Dangerous. Heretical even. And Henry loves it. The second man is Thomas Cranmer, a Cambridge scholar and reformer who shares Cromwell's view. In 1532, Henry makes Cranmer Archbishop of Canterbury, the highest church position in England. Cranmer is loyal to Henry, not Rome. He'll do what the Pope won't. By now it's been 6 years since Henry started seeking his annulment. 6 years of waiting, begging, negotiating. 6 years of frustration. And Anne Boleyn, who's been dangling the promise of marriage and sons in front of him this whole time, is getting impatient. The whispers at court grow louder. The golden king who once defended the faith now seems willing to defy it. The man who wrote a book attacking Luther is starting to sound dangerously Protestant. The court that once glittered with certainty now feels tense, divided, afraid, because everyone can see where this is heading. Henry has a choice. He can give up Anne Boleyn, accept that he'll only have a daughter as heir, and remain a loyal son of the Catholic Church. Or he can take what he wants. Marry Anne. Declare his marriage to Catherine invalid. Have the son he desperately needs. But to do that, he'll have to defy the Pope. Break with Rome. Make himself the supreme authority over the Church in England. Become something no English king has ever been before. It's an impossible choice. Except for Henry, it's not a choice at all. Because when a king believes God is on his side, when he's convinced his dynasty depends on it, when he's spent 6 years being told no by people he thinks should obey him, there's only one thing he can do. The King of England is about to go to war with the Vicar of Christ, and England will never be the same. Chapter 4. When Heaven Closed Its Doors. It is January 1533, and Henry VIII does something absolutely insane. He secretly marries Anne Boleyn. Let's be clear about how bonkers this is. He's still technically married to Catherine of Aragon. The Pope hasn't granted an annulment. Rome is furious with him. Half of Europe thinks he's lost his mind. And Henry just goes ahead and gets married anyway. Why the rush? Well, Anne is pregnant. After 6 years of keeping Henry at arm's length, she's finally given in. And now there's a baby on the way. Hopefully a son. Definitely legitimate. Which means Henry needs to marry her immediately. The ceremony happens in secret, probably at Whitehall Palace. It's quiet, quick, and technically bigamous. But Henry doesn't care. He's convinced God approves. And when you're the king, your version of reality tends to win. In May 1533, Thomas Cranmer, the new Archbishop of Canterbury and Henry's loyal man, convenes a church court at Dunstable. And Cranmer does exactly what the Pope refused to do. He declares that Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon was never valid. Null and void. It never happened. Catherine is no longer queen. She's now the Dowager Princess of Wales, widow of Arthur. And their daughter Mare? She's illegitimate. 5 days later, Cranmer declares Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn valid and lawful. On June 1st, 1533, Anne Boleyn is crowned Queen of England in a magnificent ceremony at Westminster Abbey. She's visibly pregnant. The streets are lined with pageants celebrating the new queen. It's supposed to be glorious. but the crowds are oddly quiet. Catherine of Aragon was popular. People loved her. This dark-haired woman who stole the king and pushed out the rightful queen? Not so much. Anne doesn't care. She's the winner. She's the queen. And she's carrying what she's absolutely certain is a son. On September 7th, 1533, Anne gives birth. It's a girl. They name her Elizabeth. Henry publicly celebrates. Privately, he's devastated. After everything he's done, after breaking with Rome and defying the Pope and making himself an enemy of Catholic Europe, he still doesn't have a son. But surely the next child will be a boy. Surely. Meanwhile, Rome is absolutely livid. In late 1533, the Pope threatens severe censures over the annulment and the new marriage. Henry will eventually be formally excommunicated in 1538 by Pope Paul III. But Henry doesn't wait around for papal judgment. His response? Basically, watch this. Between 1533 and 1534, Henry and Thomas Cromwell orchestrate a series of laws through Parliament that will change England forever. In 1533, Henry passes the Act in Restraint of Appeals, which declares that England is an empire with one supreme ruler. Hint, it's Henry, and nobody is allowed to appeal to the Pope anymore. Translation: the Pope can't tell me what to do because I said so. It's the political equivalent of a teenager declaring their bedroom an independent nation. Except this teenager has an army and can execute people who disagree with him, so it actually works. The Act of Succession makes Anne Boleyn's children the only legitimate heirs. Mary, Henry's daughter with Catherine, is officially bastardized. Anyone who refuses to swear an oath accepting this is guilty of treason. And then, in November 1534, comes the big one, the Act of Supremacy. In November 1534, the Act of Supremacy declares the king the only supreme head on earth of the Church of England. Not the Pope, not any foreign authority, but Henry himself. The king is now the head of the Church. England has broken with Rome. It's a revolution. A complete upheaval of everything England has known for 1,000 years. Since the days of Anglo-Saxon kings, England has been Catholic, loyal to Rome, part of universal Christendom. Not anymore. Here's the weird part, though. Henry hasn't actually changed the religion. The Church of England under Henry still looks Catholic, still has Mass, still believes in transubstantiation, in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, in confession and saints and purgatory. Henry has basically created Catholicism without the Pope. He's not Protestant, he's not Lutheran, he's just in charge now. But not everyone agrees with this new arrangement. In 1534, leading subjects are required to swear the oath of succession and acknowledge the king's supremacy. Most people take the oath. They have families to keep safe. They want to keep their heads. But two men refuse. The first is John Fisher, Bishop of Rochester. He's an old man, deeply religious, respected throughout Europe. He believes the Pope is Christ's vicar on earth, and that no earthly king can claim supremacy over God's church. The second man who refuses is Sir Thomas More. More is Henry's former Lord Chancellor. He's a brilliant humanist scholar, the man who wrote Utopia, a friend Henry once trusted deeply. But More's conscience won't let him accept that the king is head of the church. Both men are arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London. For months, Henry tries to get them to change their minds. He doesn't want to kill these men. Fisher is internationally famous. More is beloved in England. Their executions will make Henry look like a tyrant. But neither man will bend. In June 1535, Pope Paul III makes things worse by making John Fisher a cardinal. He's trying to protect Fisher by raising his status. It has the opposite effect. Henry is furious. "Let the Pope send Fisher a cardinal's hat," he reportedly says. "I'll make sure he has no head to put it on." On June 22nd, 1535, John Fisher is beheaded on Tower Hill. He is about 65 years old, so frail he can barely walk to the scaffold. His execution shocks Catholic Europe. 2 weeks later, on July 6th, 1535, Thomas More is executed for refusing to accept Henry as the head of the church. So yeah, Henry wasn't bluffing about that whole execute people who disagree thing. More's last words are peak dark humor. He tells the executioner, "Hey, just so you know, I have a really short neck, so try not to miss." Then he delivers what might be the most British understatement in history. "I die the king's good servant, but God's first." Basically, "No hard feelings, Henry, but you're still wrong and I'm going to heaven." Imagine having that level of sass while literally standing on the execution block. The man had nerves of steel and a death wish to match. So, Henry VIII has just executed two of the most respected men in England for refusing to accept his authority over the church. The Golden King, the young Renaissance prince who once defended the faith, has become something else entirely. Something darker. Someone willing to kill friends and mentors who dare to disagree with him. And here's the terrifying part. Henry genuinely believes he's doing God's will. He's convinced that making himself head of the church is righteous, that anyone who opposes him opposes God. When you have absolute power and absolute certainty, mercy becomes impossible. England is changing. The old world of universal Christendom is crumbling. Monasteries that have stood for centuries are being eyed hungrily by the crown. Ancient traditions are questioned. People whisper in corners, afraid to speak too loudly. For a moment, the whole kingdom seems to hold its breath. Even God seems to be watching in astonishment. Henry has won. He's married Anne Boleyn. He's broken with Rome. He's made himself supreme head of the church. He's executed anyone who stood in his way, but he still doesn't have a son. Anne has had miscarriages since Elizabeth's birth. The male heir that was supposed to justify everything hasn't arrived. And worse, Henry is beginning to realize something terrifying. He's unleashed forces he can't control. He's opened doors that can't be closed. He's created a church without the Pope. But now Protestant reformers think he's on their side, and conservative Catholics think he's the Antichrist. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone wants to push him further in their direction. The king who wanted absolute control has created absolute chaos. And in his court, watching carefully, are men and women who understand that in this new England, the king's favor is everything. And that favor can vanish like morning mist. Anne Boleyn is about to learn that very lesson the hard way. Chapter 5. The Queen and the Axe. It is early 1536 and Anne Boleyn is running out of time. She's been queen for less than 3 years. In that time, she's given Henry one living child, a daughter, Elizabeth. Not the son she promised, not the heir that was supposed to justify tearing England away from Rome. And she keeps losing pregnancies. There's a miscarriage in 1534 and another in January 1536. A stillborn boy. Each time, Henry's disappointment grows colder. Each time, the whispers at court grow louder. Anne was supposed to be the solution, the woman who would give Henry sons. Instead, she's starting to look like the same problem all over again. Worse, Anne has made enemies. Lots of them. She's proud, sharp-tongued, and doesn't suffer fools. She pushes religious reform further than Henry wants. She argues with him in public. She's not gentle and submissive like Catherine was. And the people? They still hate her. They blame her for everything. The break with Rome, the persecution of Catherine, the bastardization of Princess Mare. In their minds, Anne Boleyn is a witch who seduced the king and destroyed the true queen. And then, in January 1536, something happens that seals her fate. Catherine of Aragon dies on January 7th, 1536, aged 50. She is buried later that month at Peterborough Abbey. When Henry hears the news, according to reports, Henry and Anne wore yellow, perhaps a sign of celebration, though in Spain the colour could also signify mourning. Their rival is gone. Now nothing stands between them and legitimacy, except 3 weeks later comes that stillborn boy. Henry is devastated. And by devastated, I mean absolutely furious. He storms into Anne's chamber and screams, "I see that God will not give me male children," as if God is personally trolling him. Some accounts say he adds something way more ominous. "When you are up, I will speak to you," which in Tudor speak basically means we need to talk, and nothing good ever follows those words. But there's more to Henry's rage than disappointment. Just days before Anne's miscarriage, on January 24th, 1536, Henry suffered a catastrophic jousting accident. He was thrown from his horse during a tournament. The heavily armoured king fell hard, and his horse, also in full armour, collapsed on top of him. Henry lay unconscious for 2 hours. Courtiers feared he was dead. He survived, but the injury was serious. A wound to his leg that would never properly heal. For the rest of his life, Henry would suffer from an ulcerated, infected leg that caused constant pain and limited his movement. Some historians believe the head injury from this fall changed Henry's personality, making him more paranoid, more cruel, more unpredictable. When Anne heard about the accident, she was 6 months pregnant. The shock, some said, triggered her miscarriage days later. Whether that's medically accurate or convenient excuse-making, we'll never know. But Henry seemed to blame her anyway. That's when Anne Boleyn realizes she's in serious trouble. By April 1536, Henry has already moved on. He's noticed one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting, a quiet, modest young woman named Jane Seymour. She's everything Anne isn't. Pale where Anne is dark, gentle where Anne is fiery, submissive where Anne has opinions. She doesn't argue, doesn't challenge, doesn't have her own thoughts apparently, and Henry is head over heels. Finally, a woman who just agrees with him. But there's a problem. Henry is still married to Anne, and unlike with Catherine, there's no convenient Bible verse he can twist to claim this marriage was never valid. He can't exactly say, "God told me this one doesn't count either." He already used that excuse. So Henry needs a new strategy. And spoiler alert, it's going to be way darker than a divorce. Enter Thomas Cromwell. Cromwell, Henry's chief minister and the architect of the break with Rome, has been Anne's ally. But by early 1536, they've fallen out. Maybe Anne threatened his influence. Maybe she disagreed with his policies. Maybe Cromwell just saw which way the wind was blowing. Whatever the reason, Cromwell decides Anne has to go. And since there's no legal way to divorce her, he does what any corrupt government official would do. He just makes up crimes. In late April 1536, Cromwell starts investigating Anne. And by investigating, I mean he goes around the palace asking leading questions until someone says something he can use. He questions her servants, interrogates court musicians, and basically builds a case out of gossip, petty grudges, and absolutely nothing concrete. It's like if someone decided to get you fired by asking all your co-workers, "So have you noticed anything weird about Karen?" Eventually, someone's going to say yes. The charges, when they finally come, are absolutely unhinged. Anne is accused of sleeping with 5 different men, including her own brother George. She's also accused of plotting to murder the king. Oh, and witchcraft, because why not throw that in too? Treason, incest, you name it. They basically threw every crime they could think of at her, except maybe stealing horses. Here's the thing. Modern historians all agree these charges are complete nonsense, total fabrications. This is a state-sponsored hit job orchestrated by Cromwell with Henry's blessing. They're not trying to prove Anne did anything wrong. They're just trying to make her disappear legally. But in May 1536, truth doesn't matter. Only the king's will matters. On May 2nd, 1536, Anne Boleyn is arrested at Greenwich Palace and taken by barge to the Tower of London, the same tower where she'd stayed before her coronation 3 years earlier. Back then, she arrived in triumph. Now she arrives as a prisoner. The 5 men accused with her are arrested too. They're tortured. Most confess. Her brother George, executed on May 17th, maintains his innocence to the end. Anne's trial takes place on May 15th, 1536, in the Tower of London. She's judged by a jury of her so-called peers, which includes her own uncle. Totally fair and unbiased, I'm sure. It's a show trial. Everyone knows the verdict before it even starts. She's found guilty of adultery, treason, and incest. The punishment is death, shocking absolutely no one. Meanwhile, Henry is already planning his next wedding. While Anne is literally sitting in a prison cell waiting to be executed, he's flirting with Jane Seymour and getting their engagement contract written up. He's just waiting for one tiny little detail to be cleared up. You know, Anne's whole being alive situation. Then, on May 17th, just 2 days before Anne's execution, Henry does something truly spectacular in its cruelty. He has their marriage annulled, retroactively. So according to the law, Anne was never really his wife and was never actually queen, which means her daughter Elizabeth is now officially illegitimate, a bastard just like her half-sister Mary. Let that sink in. Henry is executing Anne for adultery in a marriage that he's simultaneously claiming never legally existed. Make it make sense. You can't, because it doesn't. It's just Henry doing whatever Henry wants and calling it justice. On the morning of May 19th, 1536, Anne Boleyn is led out onto Tower Green. She's about 35 years old. She's been Queen of England for less than 3 years. She's the mother of a 2-year-old daughter who will one day be the greatest queen England ever knows. But right now she's just a frightened little girl who doesn't understand why her mother is gone. Anne has been granted one mercy. Instead of the axe, which can take multiple strikes and cause immense suffering, Henry has imported a French swordsman from Calais. The sword is swift, clean, almost merciful. Anne addresses the small crowd gathered to witness her death. She's composed, dignified. She doesn't protest her innocence directly. That would be treasonous even now. Instead, she praises the king. She says she's been judged according to the law and accepts her fate. Some accounts say her last words include, "Good Christian people, I have come here to die according to law. I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you." Then she kneels. She removes her headdress. She covers her eyes with a cloth. The swordsman standing behind her raises his blade. With one swift stroke, Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, is dead. She's the first queen in English history to be executed by order of her husband. She won't be the last. 10 days later, on May 30th, 1536, Henry marries Jane Seymour at Whitehall Palace. 10 days. That's how long Henry waits between executing one wife and marrying the next. The court is still reeling from Anne's death, and Henry is already celebrating his 3rd wedding. If anyone at court was unclear about how dangerous it is to be in Henry's good graces, the message is now crystal clear. Today's favorite is tomorrow's corpse. Think about this for a second. This is the same man who wrote passionate love letters to Anne for years. The same man who broke with the entire Catholic Church just to marry her. Who made her queen. Who tore England apart. caused a religious revolution, and made enemies across Europe, all for her sake. And now? He's just had her head chopped off based on charges he absolutely knows are lies. And the wildest part? He's already moved on like she never existed. Anne who? Never heard of her. It's been less than 10 days since her execution, and Henry's already planning his wedding to Jane. The man has the emotional depth of a puddle and the attention span of a goldfish. Except, you know, with unlimited power and a team of executioners on speed dial. The Tower bell still echoes across London. Somewhere, a 2-year-old girl named Elizabeth is too young to understand that her mother is never coming home. The court whispers behind closed doors. Europe is shocked, but at Whitehall Palace there's already a new lullaby rising. Because Jane Seymour is now queen, though she will never have a formal coronation. Gentle, obedient, perfect Jane. And Henry is convinced that this time, finally, he'll get his son. The king has shown he can feel grief. He mourned his mother. He'll mourn Jane when the time comes. But right now, in the spring of 1536, one thing is crystal clear. Henry's need for a son burns brighter than love. Brighter than mercy. Brighter than the memory of a woman who once made him defy the world. And God help anyone who stands between Henry VIII and his dinner. Sorry, I mean his dynasty. Chapter 6. The Rose That Died. The year is 1536, and Jane Seymour is queen. She is not the firebrand Anne Boleyn was, nor the Spanish princess Catherine of Aragon had been. Jane is something else entirely. Quiet, gentle, obedient. She wears pale colours and keeps her eyes lowered. She speaks softly and agrees with everything Henry says. After the storm of Anne Boleyn, after the years of shouting and defiance and religious revolution, Jane Seymour is like a cool cloth on a fevered brow. Henry adores her for it. The court breathes easier. The new queen doesn't meddle in politics. She doesn't lecture the king on theology or push for reformers at court. She simply sits beside him, embroidering, smiling gently, being exactly what a Tudor queen is supposed to be. Supportive, fertile, silent. Basically, she's read the job description and she's nailing it. And Henry, that great bloated tyrant, becomes almost tender around her. He calls her his true wife, his beloved, the one who finally understands what it means to be Queen of England, which, let's be honest, means agreeing with him about everything. But whilst Jane sits peacefully at court, stitching and praying, the kingdom beyond the palace walls is about to explode. It's autumn, 1536. In the north of England, in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, and the wild counties that still remember the old ways, something is stirring. Anger, resentment, fury. For months now, men dressed in black have been riding from monastery to monastery carrying the king's orders. These are Thomas Cromwell's commissioners, and they're basically the Tudor equivalent of repo men. They show up with ledgers and dead eyes, writing down everything valuable, interrogating terrified monks, and shutting down institutions that have been running for literally centuries. The monasteries are being dissolved, which is a polite way of saying the king is robbing them blind and kicking everyone out. Here's the thing people forget. These monasteries aren't just churches where monks sit around praying all day. They're the medieval version of community centres, hospitals, and social services all rolled into one. The monks run schools for local kids. They operate hospitals and care for the sick. They feed poor people who have nowhere else to go. They're basically holding together the social safety net for entire regions. And Henry is tearing it all down. One by one, he's shutting them down, seizing their lands, melting down their gold, and stealing their ancient manuscripts, many of which will be lost forever. But Henry doesn't care because they don't have pictures of him in them. It's the largest theft of property in English history, and he's calling it religious reform. Very convenient how reform always seems to involve Henry getting richer. And for what? So Henry can fund his wars. So he can reward his loyal lords with stolen church property. So he can prove, once and for all, that he's supreme head of the Church of England and no pope in Rome can tell him what to do. It's basically the Tudor equivalent of asset stripping, and the people are horrified, especially in the north, where loyalty to the old Catholic faith runs deep as tree roots. They watch the monks turned out onto the roads. They watch the great abbeys emptied and locked. They watch centuries of tradition ground into dust. And then, in October 1536, they rise. It begins in Lincolnshire. A local priest, Thomas Kendall of Louth, sounds the alarm. Legend says he rang the church bells backwards, the old signal for danger. Within days, 10,000 men have gathered, armed with pitchforks and rusty swords and righteous fury. They call themselves pilgrims. They march under banners showing the 5 wounds of Christ. They're not rebels, they insist. They're faithful subjects petitioning their king to restore the true faith and remove his evil counselors, by which they really mean one specific counsellor, Thomas Cromwell. The smaller Lincolnshire rising is quickly suppressed, but it's just the beginning. In Yorkshire, that October, a barrister named Robert Aske takes command of something far bigger. Suddenly there aren't 10,000 pilgrims, but 30,000, then 40,000. Entire towns join them. Knights and lords put on the pilgrimage badge and ride north. This isn't a peasant uprising anymore. This is a movement. They call it the Pilgrimage of Grace. Their demands are simple. Stop closing the monasteries. Restore the authority of the Pope. Remove Thomas Cromwell from power. Return Princess Mary to the line of succession. In other words, undo everything Henry's done for the past 5 years. Reverse the entire English Reformation. No big deal. Henry is furious. He's at Windsor with Jane when news of the rebellion reaches him. For a moment, those who see his face say he looks genuinely frightened. 40,000 armed men marching south. That's more soldiers than Henry has in his entire army. If they reach London, if they take the capital, he could lose everything. But fear in Henry VIII always curdles into rage. He sends his commander, the Duke of Norfolk, north with promises. Talk to them, Norfolk is instructed. Make them think we're listening. Buy time. And Norfolk does. He meets with Robert Aske under a flag of truce. He's all smiles and sympathy. Of course, the king will consider their grievances. Of course, His Majesty cares about his northern subjects. A parliament will be called. Concerns will be addressed. It's all lies. Robert Aske believes him. The pilgrims, trusting in their king's word, go home. They lay down their weapons. They return to their villages, convinced they've been heard. And then Henry strikes. He waits until the pilgrims are dispersed, until the threat has passed. And then he sends Norfolk back with an army, and orders to show no mercy. It's the Tudor version of "Hold my beer." The leaders are arrested. Robert Aske is captured, and in July 1537, hanged in chains at York Castle. His body is left dangling from the walls as a warning. Very on brand for Henry. Over 200 rebels, abbots, and gentry are executed, hanged, beheaded, their heads mounted on spikes. Entire families are destroyed. And what of the monasteries? The dissolution accelerates. By 1540, every monastery in England has been dissolved. More than 800 houses emptied. Their wealth, roughly a fifth of England's land, flows into the royal treasury. It's the greatest transfer of wealth in English history, and it's drenched in blood. Thomas Cromwell oversees it all with ruthless efficiency. He's Henry's right hand, the architect of the New England. He reforms the government, streamlines the bureaucracy, makes the state machinery run like a well-oiled clock. Historians will call it the Tudor Revolution in government. Cromwell calls it Tuesday. By the late 1530s, the vast treasury left by Henry's careful father has long since vanished. The wars, the palaces, the endless feasts and tournaments. So the monasteries are the solution. Sell off their lands to loyal nobles, melt down their gold and silver, burn their books if they contradict the king's supremacy. It's efficient, it's brutal, it works. But while the kingdom is literally tearing itself apart with religious violence and people are starving because Henry stole all the monasteries, Jane Seymour is pregnant. Henry's got his eye on what really matters. The pregnancy is announced in early 1537, and the entire court collectively holds its breath. Let's review Henry's track record. 3 marriages, 2 wives either dumped or beheaded, and a truly depressing number of miscarriages and stillbirths. His only living children are 2 daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, and he's declared both of them illegitimate because that's apparently something you can just do. The king desperately needs a son. He needs a male heir. The entire future of the Tudor dynasty is riding on whatever is currently developing inside Jane Seymour's uterus. No pressure, Jane. Henry loses his mind with anxiety. Jane is treated like the world's most fragile piece of china. She's not allowed to do anything, can't exert herself, can't travel, probably can't sneeze without someone writing it down. Her every meal is watched, her every movement tracked like she's under house arrest. Court physicians follow her around like nervous mother hens. Henry prays daily for a son, but knowing Henry, he's probably already eyeing potential wife number 4 in case this doesn't work out. And on October the 12th, 1537, after a long and agonizing labor, Jane Seymour gives birth to a healthy baby boy, Prince Edward. There are bonfires in the streets. Church bells ring across London. Over 1,000 rounds are fired in salute from the Tower. Henry weeps with joy. After 28 years of marriage, after 3 wives and countless heartbreaks, he finally has his son, his heir, the future of the Tudor line, red-faced and squalling in silk blankets. It's the happiest moment of Henry VIII's life. But joy, as always with Henry, comes wrapped in tragedy. Jane Seymour isn't recovering well from the birth. In the days following Edward's arrival, she develops a fever. At first it seems manageable. Post-birth fevers are common, but this one doesn't break. It climbs higher. Jane begins to sweat, to shiver, to drift in and out of consciousness. The physicians try everything: bloodletting, herbal poultices, prayer. Nothing works. The fever is puerperal sepsis, an infection of the womb, and in 1537 there's no cure for it. Jane is dying. Henry sits at her bedside, holding her hand. For once, the great king is helpless. All his power, all his wealth, all his rage at heaven and earth can't save the woman who gave him his son. She dies on October 24th, 1537, 12 days after Edward's birth, and is buried at St. George's Chapel, Windsor. Henry is devastated. Of all his wives, Jane is the one he'll remember most fondly. She never defied him, never argued, never made him feel small or questioned or challenged. She gave him his son and asked for nothing in return. In Henry's mind, she's the perfect wife, the true one. Years later, when he draws up plans for his own tomb, he'll request to be buried beside Jane Seymour. The court drapes itself in black. Henry retreats into mourning, refusing to see anyone for weeks. The baby prince is taken away to be cared for by nurses, isolated in a household of his own, because infant mortality is so high that no one can risk losing him now. England has its heir, but the Queen is dead, and Henry VIII, for all his celebrating, is single again. So much for third time's the charm. The kingdom he's spent years tearing apart and rebuilding is completely unrecognizable. The monasteries? Gone. Stolen. The Pope's authority in England? Destroyed. Parliament? Now basically Henry's rubber stamp that approves whatever he wants. Thomas Cromwell has built a government machine so efficient at crushing anyone who disagrees that it would make modern dictators jealous. And up in the north, in the villages where rebels once marched on the Pilgrimage of Grace, there are still severed heads rotting on spikes as a friendly reminder not to question the king. Henry finally has his son. Mission accomplished, right? Except let's tally up the cost. Roughly 200 executed pilgrims, 800 monasteries destroyed and looted, countless families torn apart, communities destroyed, lives ruined, and one dead queen who literally gave him everything he wanted and died doing it. Was it worth it, Henry? Spoiler, he thinks yes. For nearly 2 years, Henry dresses in black and keeps the court subdued. Prince Edward grows in his isolated nursery, healthy and strong, a miracle child who carries the weight of an entire dynasty on his infant shoulders. But kings don't mourn forever. And Thomas Cromwell, ever practical, ever ambitious, has his eye on the map of Europe. Because whilst Henry grieves, the world keeps turning. And out there, by 1539, in the courts of Protestant Germany, there's a woman Cromwell thinks might be perfect for the king. He has no idea he's about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Chapter 7. The Flanders Mare and the Falling Minister. It's 1539 now. Prince Edward is about 18 months old. He's healthy, but he's also the only legitimate male heir to the Tudor throne. One childhood illness and the entire dynasty collapses. England needs a backup plan, which means Henry needs a wife. Thomas Cromwell, principal advisor to Henry VIII, is getting nervous. In June 1538, King Francis I of France and Emperor Charles V signed the Truce of Nice, a fragile peace that alarmed England. 2 of the most powerful Catholic monarchs in Europe are suddenly potential allies. Against England, against the heretic king who broke with Rome. The Pope has been calling for a crusade against Henry for years. Now it might actually happen. England needs friends, allies, and Cromwell knows exactly where to find them. The Protestant princes of Germany. Specifically, the Schmalkaldic League, which is basically a military alliance of Lutheran states that have also told the Pope to take a hike. An alliance with them could help England stand up to the 2 Catholic superpowers, France and Spain, who would love nothing more than to crush Henry for his whole breaking with Rome thing. There's just one problem. By late 1538, the German princes want to seal this alliance the old-fashioned way, with a marriage. They want Henry to marry one of their princesses, which means Henry needs to find wife number 4, and given his track record, this is a bit like asking someone who's totaled 3 cars in a row if they'd like to test drive a 4th. No matter. Cromwell starts shopping for a Protestant bride. He settles on Anne, daughter of Duke John III of Cleves, ruler of a small but strategic territory on the Rhine. Cromwell commissions Hans Holbein, the king's court painter, to paint Anne's portrait. When the painting arrives in England, Henry is intrigued. The woman in the portrait is pleasant-looking, demure, acceptable. A marriage treaty is signed. Anne of Cleves will become the 4th wife of Henry VIII. She lands at Deal, Kent, on the 27th of December 1539. Henry can barely contain his excitement. He's been a widower for 2 years. He's lonely, he's eager, and according to Holbein's portrait, his new bride is lovely. But Henry, being Henry, can't just wait for the formal meeting. He has to play the chivalrous knight, appearing incognito to surprise her. It's New Year's Day, 1540. Anne is at Rochester, resting before her final journey to London. Henry rides down with courtiers, all dressed in disguise. He bursts into Anne's chamber unannounced, expecting her to recognize him instantly, to swoon with delight. Anne has no idea who this fat, limping stranger is. One account claims she was watching a bull baiting out the window when Henry arrived. She barely glances at him, and when he tries to embrace her, she recoils, confused and alarmed, because from her perspective, some random middle-aged man just walked into her room uninvited. Henry is mortified. He retreats, changes into royal robes, and returns officially. This time, Anne recognizes him and curtsies appropriately. But the damage is done. The magic is shattered. Because Anne of Cleves is not what Henry expected. She's not ugly, let's be clear. By all accounts, she's perfectly ordinary looking. But she's not the delicate beauty Holbein painted. She's tall, she's sturdy. She's dressed in heavy German fashions. She speaks no English. She doesn't know how to flirt or play the games of courtly love that Henry adores. And Henry, spoiled and vain, is bitterly disappointed. He complains to Cromwell, loudly. He calls Anne plain. He says she has bad skin, that she smells. He even uses the phrase Flanders Mare, comparing her to a cart horse. It's cruel. It's petty. It's very Henry. But the marriage has been arranged. The treaty has been signed. Cromwell begs Henry to go through with the wedding. Just marry her. Do your duty. Think of England. So on the 6th of January 1540, Henry VIII marries Anne of Cleves at Greenwich Palace, and it's a disaster from the start. Henry can't bring himself to consummate the marriage. He tries, apparently, but he just can't. The morning after the wedding night, he tells his courtiers that Anne must still be a virgin because I liked her not, which is a charming way of announcing to the entire court that he couldn't perform. For 6 months, the unconsummated marriage drags on. Anne tries to learn English, adapts to English customs, is kind and gracious. But Henry won't touch her. He avoids her. He sulks like a petulant child. Meanwhile, Henry has noticed someone else at court. A young woman attending on Anne. Her name is Catherine Howard, niece of the Duke of Norfolk and cousin to Anne Boleyn. She's about 19 years old, with dark hair and bright eyes, and she giggles at the king's jokes. Henry, now 48, obese, his leg oozing through bandages from his jousting accident in 1536, is smitten. By summer 1540, Henry has made up his mind. The marriage to Anne must be annulled, immediately. Cromwell tries to salvage the situation, but it's hopeless. Henry wants out. And besides, the German alliance isn't urgent anymore. Charles and Francis are bickering again. The threat of invasion has receded. Anne of Cleves has become politically unnecessary. So Henry summons Anne and explains the situation. The marriage was never consummated. Would she agree to an annulment? Anne of Cleves is no fool. She's seen what happened to Henry's previous wives. Catherine died in disgrace. Anne Boleyn was beheaded. Jane died giving birth. Anne of Cleves has zero desire to join that list. So she agrees, immediately, cheerfully. Yes, Your Majesty. Whatever you say, Your Majesty, please don't kill me. Henry is delighted. He grants Anne a generous settlement. Richmond Palace, Hever Castle, a substantial income, the honorary title of the King's beloved sister. And Anne, sensibly, accepts it all with grace. She never remarries, never returns to Germany, lives quietly in England for another 17 years, outliving Henry himself. Of all his wives, Anne of Cleves plays the game perfectly. She escapes with her head, her dignity, and a comfortable fortune. The annulment is declared on the 9th of July 1540 and ratified a few days later. Henry is free, but someone has to pay for this humiliation. Someone has to be blamed. Thomas Cromwell knows what's coming. He's been Henry's right hand for nearly a decade. He engineered the break with Rome, dissolved the monasteries, reformed the government, made Henry the richest, most powerful king England has ever seen. But Cromwell has enemies. Lots of them. The conservative Catholic faction, led by the Duke of Norfolk, hates him, and now they have ammunition. The Cleves marriage was Cromwell's idea. His failure. They whisper in Henry's ear, Cromwell is a traitor, a heretic, too powerful, too arrogant, too dangerous. And Henry, humiliated and infatuated with young Catherine Howard, listens. On June 10th, 1540, Thomas Cromwell is arrested. He's at a council meeting when the Duke of Norfolk accuses him of treason. Cromwell tries to defend himself at the council table, but it's pointless. He's stripped of his titles, his badges torn from his clothes, and thrown into the Tower of London. He writes desperate letters to Henry, begging for mercy. Most gracious Prince, I cry for mercy, mercy, mercy. But mercy is not something Henry VIII gives to men who disappoint him. The letters go unanswered. On July 28th, 1540, Thomas Cromwell is taken to Tower Hill. The man who built Henry's power, who broke England from Rome, who dissolved 800 monasteries, is dragged to the scaffold. He goes to his death protesting his innocence, swearing he was always a faithful servant. The executioner botches the job, striking several times before the head falls. The crowd watches in silence. That same day, 28th July 1540, Henry VIII marries Catherine Howard at Oatlands Palace. The timing is grotesque. The king who has just executed his most capable minister is in a chapel exchanging vows with a teenage girl. He's dressed in white satin embroidered with gold, smiling like a man reborn. Catherine Howard is young and pretty and vivacious, and she makes him feel like a man again. Months later, Henry privately admits he was deceived, that Cromwell was his most faithful servant. But regret doesn't bring dead men back to life. England has lost the architect of its reformation. The king has murdered his right hand. And in his place, Henry has taken Catherine Howard, niece of the Duke of Norfolk and cousin to Anne Boleyn, a girl young enough to be his granddaughter. At court, they're already calling her his rose without a thorn, his jewel, his delight. But roses do have thorns, and jewels can shatter, and youth comes with secrets. Chapter 8. The Rose Without a Thorn. At court, they're already calling her his rose without a thorn, his jewel, his delight. She's about 19 or 20 years old. No one is quite sure. She has dark hair, bright eyes, and a laugh that makes the aging king feel young again. In 1541, Henry is about 50 years old, his waist measuring over 50 inches, his leg wrapped in bandages that smell of rot. But when Catherine Howard giggles at his jokes, when she dances for him, he forgets the pain. He showers her with gifts, jewels, gowns, lands, titles. He calls her his rose without a thorn, his perfect flower. The court hasn't seen Henry this happy since the early days with Anne Boleyn. He commissions new music, throws lavish feasts, even attempts to dance despite his bulk. Catherine Howard has breathed life into a dying man. But Catherine is very, very young, and she has secrets. She's the niece of the Duke of Norfolk and cousin to Anne Boleyn, the Queen Henry beheaded 4 years earlier. The Howards are an ambitious family, and they've placed Catherine at court deliberately, grooming her to catch the king's eye. It worked, but no one bothered to investigate Catherine's past very carefully. Before court life, Catherine lived with her step-grandmother, Agnes Tilney, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, in what can only be described as the Tudor equivalent of an unsupervised dorm. It was chaotic, poorly supervised, full of young women with way too much freedom and not enough adult supervision. Think less noble household and more party house where nobody checks what you're doing. And teenage Catherine took full advantage. She had a fling with her music teacher, Henry Mannix. Scandalous, but not terrible. Then she got involved with a young gentleman named Francis Dereham, and this one was serious. He may have been her lover. They may have even had a pre-contract of marriage, which in Tudor times is basically like being engaged. And here's why that matters. If they were pre-contracted, her later marriage to King Henry might technically be invalid. It's the kind of detail you really should mention before marrying the king. Catherine never told Henry about any of this. Not a word. She showed up at court presenting herself as an innocent virgin, and Henry bought it completely. Why wouldn't he? She was young, adorable, and made him feel like a stud again instead of an aging, overweight man with a rotting leg. He married her believing she was pure and untouched. Spoiler alert, this is going to be a massive problem. For the first year of marriage, everything seems fine. Henry and Catherine travel on a royal progress from July to October 1541 through the north that had rebelled 5 years earlier. Catherine smiles and waves, wears elaborate gowns, plays her part perfectly. But underneath the performance, she's doing something monumentally stupid. She's been having an affair with one of Henry's grooms, a handsome young man named Thomas Culpeper. It's not entirely clear how far the affair went, whether it was just flirtation, secret meetings, passionate letters, or actual adultery. But it doesn't matter. The Queen of England meeting secretly with another man, exchanging love tokens, writing him notes that say, "Yours as long as life endures," is treason. Even if they never touched, it's treason. And then, in November 1541, everything falls apart. A reformist named John Lascelles approaches Archbishop Thomas Cranmer with information about the Queen's past. His sister had been a servant in the Dowager Duchess's household and remembers Catherine's relationship with Francis Dereham. The late-night visits, the stolen kisses, the rumors they were secretly betrothed. Cranmer is horrified. He writes it all down in a letter and places the letter on the King's pew during the All Saints' Day service at Hampton Court on November 2nd, 1541. Henry reads the letter, and at first he doesn't believe it. Not his Catherine, not his perfect Rose. He orders an investigation, confident it will clear her name. It doesn't. Under interrogation, Francis Dereham admits to the relationship. Servants start talking, and then, catastrophically, someone finds the letters Catherine wrote to Thomas Culpeper. The investigation expands. Was the Queen unfaithful during her marriage? She's first held under guard at Hampton Court, then moved to Syon Abbey as a prisoner. Thomas Culpeper is arrested and tortured. He confesses to meeting the Queen privately, though he swears they never consummated the affair. Francis Dereham is also arrested. The Dowager Duchess of Norfolk and several other Howard family members are thrown into the Tower. Henry is devastated. For days he can't believe it. He rages, he weeps, he calls for a sword to kill Catherine himself. Courtiers keep sharp objects away from him, genuinely afraid of what he might do. This is worse than Anne Boleyn's betrayal. Catherine was his perfect young bride, his joy, his reward after years of disappointment. In December 1541, Thomas Culpeper and Francis Dereham are tried and convicted of treason. On December 10th, they're both executed at Tyburn. Dereham suffers the full horror of a traitor's death, hanged, drawn, and quartered. Culpeper, because he's gentry, is granted the mercy of simple beheading. Catherine, still confined at Syon Abbey, knows what's coming. She asks for the executioner's block to be brought to her rooms so she can practice laying her head upon it. She's 19 or 20 years old, barely more than a girl, and she's preparing to die. Some say she goes mad with fear. Others say she becomes eerily calm. On February 11th, 1542, Parliament passes a Bill of Attainder, a law that declares Catherine guilty of treason without trial. The charge is concealing her previous relationships from the king, which amounts to deceiving him into marriage. On February 13th, 1542, Catherine Howard is taken to the Tower of London. She's beheaded on the morning of February 13th, 1542, on the Tower Green scaffold, where her cousin Anne Boleyn had died 6 years earlier. She reportedly proclaims she dies a queen, but wishes she had died Culpeper's wife. Whether she actually said this or whether it's romantic legend, no one knows. But the sentiment captures her tragedy. She was a child thrust into a world of power and politics she didn't understand, married to a dangerous old man, and she made catastrophic choices. Her body is buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, within the tower, just yards from Anne Boleyn's grave. 2 of Henry's queens, both Howards, both beheaded, both barely into their 20s, lying side by side in unmarked graves. Henry never speaks her name again. But there's one more death that year, one that reveals just how paranoid Henry has become. In May 1541, Margaret Pole, the Countess of Salisbury, is beheaded at the Tower of London. She's 67 years old. Let that sink in for a moment. She's a grandmother, and she's also the last surviving member of the Plantagenet dynasty, the royal family that ruled England before the Tudors muscled their way in. She's been rotting in prison since 1539 for the terrible crime of being related to her son, Reginald Pole, who fled to Rome and called Henry a heretic. So basically, guilt by association with someone who said mean things about the king. Margaret has been condemned by an act of attainder, which is a fancy legal term, meaning we're declaring you guilty without a trial, without evidence, without you actually doing anything wrong. It's government-sanctioned murder with paperwork. On May 27, 1541, she's dragged to the scaffold. According to chroniclers, she declares she's no traitor and refuses to kneel for the executioner. So the inexperienced axeman chases her around the scaffold and hacks at her neck and shoulders repeatedly before she finally dies. It takes 11 blows. It's an absolute butchery. The brutal execution of an elderly woman whose only crime was having the wrong bloodline. And it reveals something genuinely terrifying about Henry VIII in his final years. He's not just ruthless anymore. He's paranoid. He's vengeful. He's willing to murder a 67-year-old woman because her existence reminds him that other families have claims to his throne. The man who once wrote love poetry is now killing grandmothers for having royal blood. By early 1542, Henry is alone again. He weighs well over 25 stone, his leg never healing. His 5th wife is dead. His minister Cromwell is dead. Margaret Pole is dead. The Howard family is in disgrace. The court is silent, terrified. He's in chronic pain, which makes him irritable, unpredictable, dangerous. He needs servants to carry him because he can barely walk. He's a physical wreck, and angrier than he's ever been. At court, the music of youth has ended beneath the tower's drums. The laughter, the dancing, the brief illusion of happiness that Catherine Howard brought is all gone. What remains is an obese, diseased tyrant on a throne surrounded by frightened courtiers. Love has turned to blood again. 2 wives beheaded now. 1 wife dead in childbirth. 2 wives cast aside. And only Anne of Cleves clever enough to escape with her head and her freedom. Who in their right mind would dare stand beside him now? Chapter 9. The Last Queen and the Shadow of Death. The year is 1543, and Henry VIII is dying, not all at once, mind you. Not with the drama of a battlefield or the swift mercy of an executioner's blade. No, Henry is dying the way empires crumble. Slowly, painfully, piece by rotting piece. His leg weeps pus through silk bandages, the old Greenwich jousting wound from January 1536 that never healed. It festers now, a permanent open sore that smells of death and makes grown men turn away. His waist, once trim and athletic, now measures 54 inches around. He weighs over 300 pounds. Servants haul him up staircases in a mechanical chair. The golden prince who danced until dawn now struggles to stand. And yet, impossibly, he marries again. On July 12, 1543, in the Chapel Royal at Hampton Court Palace, Henry takes his 6th wife. Yes, 6th. The man treats marriage like a subscription service he keeps cancelling. Her name is Catherine Parr. She's 31 years old, twice widowed, and by all accounts, she absolutely does not want this marriage. She's in love with Thomas Seymour, the brother of late Queen Jane and uncle to Henry's son, Prince Edward. Thomas is handsome, charming, exciting, all the things Henry definitely isn't anymore. But when a dying, paranoid tyrant who's already killed 2 wives asks you to marry him, no thanks isn't an option. Catherine Parr is no naive teenager. She's educated, intelligent, and calm under pressure. She speaks Latin and French fluently, reads theology for fun, and writes her own devotional texts. She's already survived 2 marriages and outlived both husbands. From natural causes, to be clear. She's not a black widow, just unlucky. She knows how to navigate dangerous situations. And perhaps most importantly for what's coming, she's genuinely kind. Not the fake, calculated kindness you perform at court to get ahead, but actual human compassion. The kind that doesn't recoil when faced with festering leg wounds or the violent mood swings of a man who once conquered kingdoms and now can barely get out of bed without help. She's basically signing up to be a nurse with a crown. Lucky her. Henry needs a nurse more than a wife. And Catherine Parr, whether from duty or genuine care, becomes exactly that. She tends his ulcerated leg. She reads to him. She discusses theology with him carefully, always deferring to his superior wisdom, even when she knows more than he does. She manages his household, his temper, his children. For the first time in years, something like peace settles over the Tudor court. Not happiness exactly, but peace. The Protestant leanings she quietly holds, she keeps mostly to herself. She publishes a book in 1545 titled Prayers or Meditation, becoming the first English queen to publish under her own name. It's a sensation. A queen who writes? A queen who thinks? It's revolutionary, wrapped in piety. But Catherine's greatest achievement isn't literary, it's familial. For years, Henry's children have been scattered, separated, declared bastards, and then grudgingly acknowledged. Mary, his eldest, is 27 years old and embittered by years of humiliation. Elizabeth is 10, clever and watchful, learning already that survival means staying silent. Edward, the precious prince, is being raised separately, groomed for kingship. Catherine Parr brings them together. She reconciles Henry with his daughters. She ensures Mary and Elizabeth are included in family gatherings and oversees Edward's education under Protestant tutors like John Check and Richard Cox. In 1543, Parliament passes the Third Act of Succession, restoring Mary and Elizabeth to the line of inheritance after Edward. They're still technically illegitimate, but they're heirs again. It's Catherine's gentle, persistent influence that makes it happen. But kindness in Henry's court has always been dangerous. In 1544, Henry decides he wants one last taste of glory. He's 53 years old, grotesquely obese, can barely walk, and his leg is literally rotting. But sure, let's go to war. He's heading to France to prove he's still the warrior king from his youth, the one who wrestled Francis I and won at... Oh wait, he lost that one. Anyway, this time he's determined to capture the city of Boulogne and show everyone he's still got it. And somehow, against all odds, he actually pulls it off. In September 1544, English forces capture Boulogne, and Henry enters the city on September 18th like a conquering hero. Well, sort of. He makes it across the English Channel and watches the actual battle from a chair because he can't stand for long periods. His soldiers storm the walls while Henry sits there watching like he's at a tournament, except this time he's not the one fighting. It's honestly kind of sad. Here's a dying king claiming a city England can't afford to keep, spending money the kingdom doesn't have, bankrupting the treasury to prove something to absolutely no one but himself. He needs to believe he's still that young, vigorous king who could fight and dance and charm everyone. But that man died decades ago, and all that's left is this. While he's gone, Catherine Parr serves as Regent of England. Think about that. A woman ruling England in the king's absence, signing documents, making decisions, showing everyone, including herself, that queens can govern just as well as kings. It's a glimpse of what's coming, though no one knows it yet. But the war is a disaster financially. To pay for it, beginning in 1544, Henry orders the silver coinage debased, reducing the silver content, triggering inflation that will haunt England for decades. He sells off the last of the monastic lands. He borrows from Italian bankers at ruinous interest rates. And in July 1545, disaster strikes literally. In July 1545, during the Battle of the Solent, the French fleet attacks, and on July 19th, the Mare Rose capsizes and sinks. Henry, bloated and wheezing, stands on the shore near Portsmouth, watching his beloved warship sail out to meet them. There's a sudden gust of wind. The ship lists, water pours through the open gun ports, and in front of the king's horrified eyes, the Mare Rose goes down, taking over 400 men with her. Henry can hear their screams from the shore. By 1546, the king is a nightmare. The pain never stops. His temper, never good, becomes volcanic. Courtiers live in terror. One wrong word, one perceived slight, and heads roll. Literally. The Howard family, once so powerful, nearly gets wiped out. The Earl of Surrey, a talented poet and proud nobleman, is executed on January 19th, 1547, while his father Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, awaits execution in the Tower. Only Henry's death will save him. And Catherine Parr. She nearly joins Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard on the scaffold. Conservative Catholic courtiers, terrified that Protestant ideas are spreading through the palace, decide Catherine needs to go. They notice that she discusses theology with Henry. She debates scripture with him. She gently, carefully questions some of his religious positions, so they go to Henry and convince him she's a heretic, that she's secretly a radical Protestant leading him astray, that she deserves to be burned at the stake, because apparently having intellectual conversations with your husband is now a capital offense. In July 1546, Henry actually signs a warrant for her arrest. He's ready to do it, ready to send his sixth wife to the flames. Then the next day he changes his mind and cancels it. The man is so unstable at this point he can't even commit to killing someone for 24 hours. But Catherine Parr didn't survive 2 previous husbands and 6 years navigating Henry's court by being stupid. When she hears whispers about what's coming, she immediately goes to Henry's chamber. She finds him in agony, his leg festering, his mood foul, ready to sign her death warrant again. And she absolutely nails the performance of her life. She falls to her knees. She weeps. She tells him she only ever discussed theology to learn from his vastly superior wisdom, that she questioned him only to hear him explain things brilliantly, that she argued only to distract him from his terrible pain by engaging his magnificent mind. She basically tells this bloated, paranoid tyrant that he's the smartest, most wonderful king England has ever seen, and she's just a silly little woman who wanted to bask in his genius. It's humiliating. It's manipulative. It's survival. And it works. Henry, his ego stroked, his rage diffused, embraces her. When the guards arrive to arrest the Queen, they find the royal couple reconciled. The conspirators are banished instead. Catherine Parr, the quiet widow who never wanted to be queen, has outplayed them all. By late 1546, the palace smells of rot and rosewater, of festering wounds and burning incense meant to cover the stench. The king can barely walk. He rages at servants, at ministers, at God himself for making him suffer. The man who broke with Rome, who executed 2 wives and countless subjects, who reshaped England's very soul, is trapped in a failing body, surrounded by sycophants and assassins, waiting for the darkness he can feel creeping closer. And Catherine Parr sits beside him, reading scripture, tending his wounds, and wondering how long she has to endure before she's finally free. Outside the palace, England holds its breath. Everyone knows the king is dying. The question isn't if, but when. In January 1547, England will finally have its answer. Chapter 10. The Crown and the Grave. Henry VIII's Legacy. January 1547. Whitehall Palace. It's the final month of the king's life. Snow falls along the Thames. The river freezes at the edges. Inside the palace, in a chamber thick with shadows and the smell of sickness, the most powerful man in England is shrinking. Henry VIII lies in his bed, a mountain of flesh and failing organs. His leg, the old Greenwich jousting wound from 1536, still weeps. His breath comes in ragged gasps. The man who once jousted for hours, who danced until dawn, who beheaded wives and ministers with a stroke of his pen, can barely lift his head. But even now, even dying, he's still dangerous. Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, sits in the Tower of London waiting to die. The execution warrant is written up and ready to go. There's just one problem. It needs the king's signature, and Henry's hand shakes too badly to hold a pen. So Norfolk waits, and waits, in what has to be the most stressful game of will he or won't he in English history. Norfolk served Henry faithfully for decades. He helped destroy Anne Boleyn. He helped destroy Thomas Cromwell. And now it's his turn, apparently, because he's too powerful, too Catholic, and too connected to the old noble families that make the Tudors nervous. His son isn't so lucky. The Earl of Surrey, a talented poet and proud nobleman, was executed on January 19th, 1547, on Tower Hill. His crime? He put the royal coat of arms on his own family crest. Basically, he decorated a bit too ambitiously, and Henry decided that meant he was claiming the throne. So, off with his head. Henry signed that warrant without a second thought. Around the dying king, the court is basically a shark tank. Protestant reformers, led by Edward Seymour, uncle to Prince Edward, are positioning themselves to control the 9-year-old boy who's about to become king. Catholic conservatives are praying for a miracle, hoping Henry recovers so they're not all purged. Everyone knows the old king is dying. Everyone is already picking sides for the power struggle that's coming. But nobody, and I mean nobody, is saying this out loud while Henry can still hear them. In another part of the palace, Catherine Parr, stepmother to them all, sits with the royal children. Mary is 31, bitter, broken, and clinging to her Catholic faith like it's the only thing keeping her sane. Elizabeth is 13, sharp as a blade, watching everything and learning that the key to survival is keeping your mouth shut. Edward is 9, pale, serious, and being stuffed full of Protestant theology by tutors who see him as their meal ticket. 3 children, 3 completely different visions for England's future, all waiting for their father to finally let go. Henry's world is shrinking. The great halls of Whitehall fade away. the throne room where he declared himself supreme head of the church, the gardens where he walked with Anne Boleyn, back when he thought love could change everything. It all dissolves into the dim light of a sick room, the murmur of prayers, and priests and physicians who know there's nothing left to do but watch. Does he think of them in these final hours? Catherine of Aragon, who loved him truly and died alone, cast aside like yesterday's news. Anne Boleyn, who burned like a firework across his life before he had her beheaded. Jane Seymour, who finally gave him his precious son and died for it. Catherine Howard, barely more than a teenager, who died screaming on the scaffold. Does he think of Thomas More, his brilliant friend who chose his conscience over his head and lost both? Or Thomas Cromwell, who built him an empire and got an axe as a thank you gift? What about the monasteries he destroyed, the church he broke from Rome, the kingdom he tore apart and rebuilt in his own image? We'll never know. Henry's not big on deathbed confessions. On the evening of January 27th, 1547, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer is summoned. This is the man who annulled Henry's first marriage, crowned Anne Boleyn, and helped birth the Church of England. He comes to the king's bedside for the final act. Henry can no longer speak. His eyes flutter. His massive body, that prison of flesh that betrayed the golden prince he used to be, barely moves. Cranmer leans close and asks the king to give a sign. Squeeze his hand if you trust in Christ's mercy. Henry's fingers tighten, just barely, just enough. And then, in the early hours of January 28th, 1547, at 55 years old, Henry VIII dies. The room falls silent. Nobody moves. Nobody breathes. The king is dead. The king who told the Pope to get lost, who married 6 times, who executed 2 wives like they were traitors instead of inconveniences. The king who broke England from Rome and rebuilt the nation in his image. The king who wanted, more than anything in the world, a son to carry on his name. Well, he got his wish. Kind of. At dawn on January 28th, 1547, Edward VI is proclaimed king. He's a pale, sickly 9-year-old boy who will rule for a little over 6 years before dying at 15, probably of tuberculosis. No heir. Strike 1 for the dynasty. Then Mary will seize the throne in 1553. She'll rule 5 years alongside her Spanish husband Philip, burn Protestants by the hundreds, earning the cheerful nickname Bloody Mary, and die childless in 1558. Strike 2 for the dynasty. And then Elizabeth will take the crown. Elizabeth, daughter of Anne Boleyn, the woman Henry beheaded. Elizabeth, who learned from watching her father that marriage is a trap and heirs are overrated. She'll rule from 1558 to 1603, 45 glorious years that will be called the Golden Age. But she'll never marry, never have children, and let the Tudor line die with her. Strike 3 for the dynasty. 3 children, 3 monarchs, not one of them leaving an heir. The dynasty Henry destroyed so many lives to secure. Dead within a generation. Irony, thy name is Tudor. On February the 16th, 1547, after a grand funeral 2 days earlier, Henry VIII is buried in St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, beside Jane Seymour, the wife he actually seemed to love. His coffin is enormous, heavy, carried in a torchlit procession of maximum pageantry. Everything Henry would have wanted. All the pomp, all the circumstance, all the proof that he mattered. Here's where it gets weird. In 1649, over a century later during the English Civil War, some workmen accidentally break open Henry's vault. They find his coffin split open and inside, the mummified body of the king who once shook Europe. One observer notes, with what sounds like grim satisfaction, that Henry VIII, who put so many people in the ground, now rests in a broken box beside the only woman who gave him what he wanted. Even in death, Henry VIII can't catch a break. Let's start with Catherine Parr, his sixth and final wife. The woman who nursed him through his final years, who survived him when so many others didn't. She doesn't even show up to his funeral, not even a courtesy appearance. She's already gone, off to marry Thomas Seymour in May 1547, just a few months after Henry's death. This is the guy she actually wanted to marry all along, before Henry decided he needed wife number 6. Tragically, Catherine dies in childbirth just 16 months later, in September 1548, leaving behind a baby daughter named Mare. After surviving Henry VIII, she gets exactly 1 year of actual happiness. The universe really wasn't taking requests back then. Now, the Duke of Norfolk. Here's where things get even better. This is the guy Henry wanted dead. Had the whole thing planned out. There's literally an execution warrant sitting on Henry's desk with Norfolk's name on it, just waiting for a signature. One signature. That's all it would take. But Henry dies first. Just dies before he can finish the paperwork. So Norfolk sits in the Tower of London for 7 years, probably wondering if today's the day, until Mary becomes queen in 1553 and lets him out. He dies the following year at around 80 years old, having outlived the king who tried to execute him. Sometimes waiting it out really is the best strategy. England exhales. The monster is dead. What comes next is uncertain, chaotic, bloody, and dangerous. But at least the terror of Henry's final years is over. The paranoia, the executions, the fear that one wrong word could cost you your head. Or is it? Because Henry VIII left something behind. Not just children or buildings or a pile of debts. He left a precedent. He showed future rulers that you can break with tradition, tell foreign powers to mind their own business, and reshape religion itself if you've got the will and the ruthlessness. He showed that Parliament can be used to make anything legal, even revolution. He showed that wives, ministers, and friends are all replaceable. He left England divided by religion, bleeding from wars, and financially wrecked. He left 3 damaged children who would spend the next 50 years fighting over his legacy. He left a church that's neither fully Catholic nor fully Protestant, stuck in an awkward middle ground that will fuel religious conflict for centuries. He left a legend. The boy who should never have been king. The golden prince who turned into a tyrant. The man who loved so desperately he tore his kingdom apart. The king who wanted everything and lost himself in the getting of it. History will remember Henry VIII. How could it not? He's too big, too dramatic, too human in his monstrous appetites and casual cruelties. But perhaps history will not remember him the way he imagined. When we think of Henry VIII today, we don't see the supreme head of the Church of England or the defender of the faith. We see a man in a jeweled doublet, legs spread, hands on hips, glaring out from a portrait with the cold eyes of someone who took whatever he wanted and destroyed anyone who got in his way. We see the man with 6 wives who beheaded 2 of them and still died alone. We see a warning. Power without limits corrupts absolutely. Desire without satisfaction destroys everything it touches. And a man who makes himself the center of the universe, who puts his will above law, above faith, above human life itself, that man doesn't build a legacy. He builds a graveyard. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and remember this. Even the most powerful rulers, if left unchecked by conscience or constraint, become nothing more than cautionary tales whispered in the dark. Henry VIII got his son. He got his church. He got his place in history. But in the end, he died as we all do, alone, waiting for whatever judgment comes next. And the kingdom he fought so hard to control? It slipped through his children's fingers like water, proving that some things, love and loyalty and dynasty, cannot be taken by force. They can only be earned.